Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today for another episode of Occulted. And we are going to be talking about the esoteric significance or the esoteric underpinning uh, about the conflict in the Eastern European region and America and Western Europe's interference and sort of balkanizing of that region. So, we're also going to get a little bit into what the West is, what America is, and that's going to be really perfect for this July 4th weekend. All right, so let's get into it. So I'm sure a lot of you have been seeing this incredible war raging in the Eastern European bloc there between Ukraine and Russia. And in the West, we're sort of watching it and we have great concern about it. And we're thinking a lot about perhaps the materialistic qualities that is going on. But if we pull back the curtain, there's actually a very deep esoteric battle going on between Western forces and certain Western, you could say a Western deep state, and Eastern forces. And if we don't really come to understand the occult underpinnings of conflicts and major global events, then we're not going to be able to properly address them. And that's why a lot of these problems keep going on and on and on, whether it's conflicts in the Middle East or whether it's conflicts in the European East or whether it's conflicts on our own soil. A lot of these things are spiritual battles. And when we can get to the heart of that, when we can get to the root of that, we can pull it out and confront it and look at it. But if we're only looking at the most surface level of material stuff, it's just going to keep repeating. And so today we're going to do that with our relationship with Russia and the East. So right now, there's a lot of back and forth going on and peace negotiations between Trump and America and Europe and the East. And there's been a brutal, brutal war going on there for a long time. And so they're in peace negotiations, but it's not exactly going very well because the wounds are so deep. And how this plays out even in the West is that it really seems like you can't, have certain opinions on social media, on YouTube or on, whatever platform without being called a Russian agent. So if you have an opinion that is like, well, I don't want the world to turn into kind of a globalist prison, where there are no borders and there's no distinct cultures anymore, then suddenly, or you want to appreciate the Constitution, basic things like this that would be appreciated, 10 or 15 years ago, even suddenly, if you have certain opinions politically that are not even extremely right leaning, again, these are political opinions that would be accepted, even 10, 15 years ago. Now, suddenly these ideas about specifically, preserving the American Constitution, that suddenly, you're suddenly, labeled a Russian traitor, you're getting funding from Russia or Russia's allies. So there's a real wedge being driven all the time between East and West, even in the commentator sphere. It's like we are being constantly conditioned to be against certain countries, and we're being told that they are evil, that they're jealous, and there's this constant polarization specifically between East and West. And it's true that there are cultural differences, right? It's true that there are different impulses behind these different countries. But as we're going to see in this presentation today, these differences are actually something that we're supposed to cooperate on. And there is going to be, in the future, a transfer of power and spiritual impulses that moves from the West into the East. And so when we see all of this polarization in the media and all of, we're supposed to hate each other, what's really going on is there's certain, you could call it a certain deep state that exists in the world that wants to keep East and West very, very at odds with one another, because there's going to be an eventual power shift where the spiritual impulse of life will move over into the Eastern European region. And that's where the new great culture, the new great civilization will be. And so there'll be a blossoming and a flowering in the East. And the certain powers that are most centralized, not exclusively, but most centralized in the West, this sort of, you could say, Western-oriented deep state does not want that to happen, because if there is this cooperation between the two, that means that all of the resources that they've hoarded and all the power that they've gained during this cultural period, they'll lose that. And so we have to understand that, a lot of the times when we're being polarized against these different countries, it's because there's certain people in power that directly benefit from us not cooperating with them. Now, cooperation does not mean that you have to be beneath someone or give up power or anything like that. But it does mean that you recognize that there's a natural rise and fall of civilizations. And that when one civilization rises, it goes through a peak, through a golden age, and it brings up something for the world. It brings up a specific, you could say, gift for the world. And then after that, it goes into decadence and it falls, and that impulse must be built up to the highest degree. That gift must be built up to the highest degree, and then lovingly transitioned into where the next great civilization would be. So the spirit of cooperation is extremely important in the world and in society, and that's not what we've been seeing for a very long time, but it's imperative that we get it now, because the rise of technology can create structures in the world and kind of limit humanity or lock down humanity in certain ways where it's very difficult to get out eventually. So we do have to talk about this now. So let's take a look at the great civilizations of our epoch. So our planet has several different, sorry. Our planet is divided into 7 periods of evolution, okay? And the epoch prior to us, okay, is the Atlantean epoch, which was a real civilization that had gone through an entire cycle just like we're going through, okay? And that's the Atlantean civilization, and we are the post-Atlantean civilization, okay? And there will, of course, be civilizations after ours, right? So it's this very big picture of human and planetary development that we're looking at here. So this is an image of our post-Atlantean period. So we begin with the Indian civilization, the great Indian civilization, which is a direct legacy culture and legacy civilization of Atlantis. Okay, and that is at 7893 BC, okay? And then that goes into, that culture rises and falls, and then its essence is transferred into the Persian culture, the great Persian civilization, all right? And that's 5733. That culture goes through a great rise and decline, and that the greatest of that essence is then transferred and evolved into the Egypto-Babylonian, Chaldean, Assyrian civilization, all right? Then after that, we're getting closer and we move into the Greco-Roman Latin civilization, and that is 747 BC. And then that goes for 2,160 years. Every quadrant here is about 2,160 years. Then we move into the Anglo-German civilization, which we are in now, okay? We have been in that for about 600 or so years. So after our civilization, you can see right there, very interestingly, is the Russian Slavic civilization. And I accidentally added 3 S's there. Sorry, excuse me, I just noticed that now. And the Russian Slavic civilization starts in 3573 AD. Okay, so you can see from that image there that after we have our current civilization, which is Western civilization, which is also Anglo-German civilization, it began with the German impulse and then moved into the Anglo impulse and then into finalizes in America. But once we have this civilization, it's going to again pass its wisdom and pass the highest part of it, the highest essence of it, into the Slavic Russian culture. Okay, so this again, this procession of ages, this procession of civilization is a problem for people who operate from an incredible level of greed, that build up incredible power during a civilization, and then they don't want to give it up. They don't want to cooperate. They don't want to share the technologies they have. They don't want to share the different sort of revolutions in the thought that they have. They want to hoard it all for themselves and then bring it forward throughout civilization as a means to control the public. So a lot of, you know, if, for example, the technologies that we see, but also great discoveries and great inventions, they're not necessarily used all the time for the betterment of the population. Instead, they're kind of squirreled away by people who are, you could say, part of a deeper state, and they try to use it to control humanity. But what should really be going on is that we should be all participating in these different developments directly, understanding them, and then be cooperating with not just the Eastern European region, but all regions of the world. It should be an open conversation, right? And that is the true moral and spiritual way to operate in the world. But again, we're not really seeing that. So the civilizations that you saw there, again, these are about every 2,160 years. So that's about how long any civilization lasts. And a lot of you have heard this too. You've heard about how Rome fell and how the Babylonians became decadent. And now we're beginning to confront in our Western civilization our own decadence as well, too. But every one of these great civilizations, this period of 2,160 years, is also encompassed by a spiritual impulse. It has a specific spiritual impulse that goes into it that the civilization expresses. And this is where you get the idea of the precession of the equinox. So every civilization also is dealing with a spiritual impulse that is represented astrologically or in the sky. Okay, so the great Indian civilization was influenced by Cancer, Persian, Gemini, the Egyptian, Assyrian, Chaldean, Taurus. The Greco-Roman period is Aries. Of course, during the Greco-Roman era, we get the incarnation of Christ, who is the great Lamb, the Lamb of God. And now, currently, in the Anglo-German, the fifth civilization, we are in the age of Pisces, and we are moving into the age of Aquarius, which will be, again, moving into the Russian Slavic period. Okay, so you can also track them through the precession of the ages or the Great Platonic Year through the zodiac, right? And we don't, like, modern science doesn't use that. And that's actually a problem, because when we're looking at this long period of time, tracking every single civilization, that's cyclical time. That's different than just tracking events, okay, and people. When you look at the precession of the equinox and all of these civilizations laid out like that, you're looking at the development of humanity at large. And you're able to see that during every single civilization, humanity develops certain qualities and releases certain things from the prior civilization, that every civilization recapitulates briefly and then something new comes about. And so when we look at it in this longer span, this procession of ages, it's not just superstition. This is the spiritual science of the human being when actual properties are being developed in the human, within us, every single age. Okay? So let's get into the qualities and what we are supposed to be developing in our current fifth civilization. Okay, the Anglo-German is the fifth great civilization of the post-Atlantean epoch. So let's get into what are we supposed to be developing? Because if we can understand that, we can grasp why a lot of stuff is happening right now in society, because we're either understanding this and developing these qualities or we're not. So our current civilization began in 1413, okay, the year 1413 after Christ, and it runs until 3573. So we've got about 1500 years left of our present civilization until it officially ends. And it's wild because we think about how much conflict there is and how much of a challenge this is. And when we understand the point of this civilization, what we're supposed to develop, we'll understand why. So in this time, in Western culture, you could say, we are supposed to be really developing the organ of mind. We're supposed to be developing the intellect, okay? So in earlier periods, so going back to even at the Atlantean period, Lemurian period, but even prior civilizations of our own epoch, humanity actually operated very differently than we do today. Humanity actually had a different perspective. They saw the world in a different way. And how that was that it was sort of like we were more like children. Okay, we operated more in kind of like a group mind, in a group think. Okay, and so we acted tribally. And the further we move forward, the more we have to become an individual and the more that we have to individuate. And individuation happens when the mind is properly developed. So every person has to learn to think critically, to think independently, to do calculations, to think objectively about things. Now look at some of the more dramatic things that have happened in the world in the last 3 or 4 years, where people were just doing whatever the government said, whatever an authority figure said. And you'll find that the massive amount of people behave that way. Why? Because that has been how humanity has behaved and operated as a tribe, as a group mind, for the majority of our existence. Okay, that has been the majority of human existence, has been in a tribe, in a kind of hierarchical organization, in a group mind, a hive mind. And we have to work very hard as souls to get out of that. And it's very difficult because it feels extremely isolating. It can be depressing to separate from the group, from your family, from your friend group, whatever it may be, to develop your sense of individuality and your own perspective of the world. But it is required of us during this period to do that. And if it is not done, if you're not able to think for yourself, if you're not able to think critically, then the future civilizations become very, very difficult. So again, when you look at the procession of ages, the procession of civilization, something is always being developed, always being built up. And that, for us, is our individuality. Has to be built up. And now at the same time, there are regressive elements to this, because you can't just operate only from mind. That creates literalism, that creates materialism, that creates externalism. So at the same time that we're developing mind, we also have to be surrendering our mind and unifying our mind and our will with God. So we have to develop mind and intellect, but we can't suddenly have this organ that's so powerful, this thinking, powerful organ, and then have it centered around ourselves, centered around you as an individual, because that's making you God. So you can see the challenge of this age is to develop mind properly. It's not just enough to be a great intellect. It's not just enough to be a great thinker. You have to be able to use your mind and unite it with God. And unite your will with God. And that is the task. So the danger is spiritual materialism. The danger is that people become incredibly intellectual and intelligent, but they don't ever connect that with the spiritual world, which means they never become moral. Right? And something has to be at the top of the hierarchy, so they make it themselves. And you see this a lot, where people's greatest revelation is that, the world is a simulation, and it's their job to be the center of it and hack it. And that there is a spiritual world potentially, but it really revolves around them. It revolves around the material world. So it's an inversion where the spiritual world actually revolves around their mind, what they're creating, and the material world, when it's the exact opposite. The material world actually must, for its own evolution, unite with the spiritual world. And that creates spiritualization. So there's a lot of challenges, you could say, with this development of intellect. If it's not properly attuned to God and made spiritual, it becomes completely and totally destructive. The other quality we are to develop during this period is freedom. So with the capacity to think and think for yourself, you become free. You're not free. You're not a free person if you are allowing authority figures to tell you what to do, and you're not analyzing it for yourself. You're not thinking about it. You're not drawing your own conclusions. And if you can't think for yourself, you also cannot be moral. Okay, that's the other problem. So freedom comes from a well-developed mind, actually. And in this Western time, one of the great accomplishments of the Western mind and the Western culture is to actually institutionalize freedom. And we see that in 1776 with the creation of America. Now, I know people look at America and they can pick it apart and they can say, well, America's not great because of all these different reasons. But the reality is that America was founded on a divine idea, a divine impulse. And that impulse is freedom. And the idea that every single human being, though as different as we may be, is fundamentally a child of God. It's based around natural law. So in this time of the great Western civilizations, its pinnacle is the institutionalization of freedom. And this had never happened in the world to that extent. It had never been institutionalized and made law as a covenant in this way until this time on the planet, with the consciousness that we have, with the kinds of intellect that we have. You know, before that period, every single continent of the planet practiced feudalism in different forms and slavery in different forms. And the idea that it is no longer here is a very American idea, and it's the pinnacle of Western thought. Now, do we carry it out, you know, perfectly? Absolutely not. Because there's a difference between the intention in which a nation is founded and the covenant, and whether or not the people that live in that nation keep it and value it and understand it. So you can have a nation founded on something very, very high, okay? And then whether or not the people uphold it is another story. But the intention and the founding of it is the institutionalization of freedom, meaning that in this region, everybody is free, which was a completely revolutionary concept in the world. You know, even, you know, look at Europe. It was basically a gridlocked feudal system where, you know, there was no social mobility. You know, the caste systems of India, you know, slavery existed even on the American continent itself with the Native Americans. Humanity was embroiled in slavery, and in many places of the world still is. And to this day, we are still fighting for freedom, because now we're being introduced to techno-feudalism, techno-slavery, which has been a huge theme on my channel here and also Occulted, where now there is the same impulse to enslave people, but now it's coming through technology. And so there's this constant push to dominate others and to control, that humanity has to buck off. Humanity has to overcome, and we can only overcome that not even through laws. You actually can't legislate it fully. You can legislate it to create the environment, the container, the experiment, right? But what will bring it forth is spirituality and the objective understanding of the spiritual world and spiritual man. That's the only thing that will actually bring it about in a natural way. But at first, it must be consecrated as an idea and reach everyone's heart. And so for this July 4th weekend, maybe we can think about what the real founding principle of America is, what the real impulse of this age is, okay, and how we each are carrying out. Because again, you're not just gonna, you know, make a declaration and then it just happens. It's something that people have to learn to understand and carry out. And sometimes it's done very well, and sometimes it's, you know, people try to destroy it, the impulse of freedom, okay? And one of the most important things we have to understand about the impulse of freedom and having a well-developed mind that's attuned to spirit is that, again, all of these qualities are to be passed through cooperation to other civilizations, but especially building up the Eastern European region. We absolutely should not be fighting with them, okay? Whatever issues are going on there, we need to solve, because the spiritual reality trumps everything. The spiritual reality is greater than every single one of us, and it is our job to align with it. So we should be now moving towards cooperation and doing whatever it takes to do that, because it is not in the average person's interest at all to have this kind of fighting in the world or with Eastern Europe. It's not in our interest at all. And anybody who tells you that it is lying to you. Because again, the impulses that we create here, all of the wonderful qualities, the characteristics that we create here, by nature will be passed over into that region. And when that region goes for 2,160 years, it will pass back to the American continent. It will go back to the West. And so these impulses pass from east to west, from east to west, to an individuation phase, which is characteristic of the Western portion of the world, to a Eastern collectivity phase, which is characteristic to the Eastern portion of the globe. They go back and forth like that. They have been for thousands of years, and it will continue. Okay, whether people want to realize it or not, it will continue to go back and forth from east to west, just like that, from more of an individuation impulse to a collectivity impulse. Okay, it's masculine also and feminine. That's how the world evolves. That's how humanity evolves. Now, one of the dangers of freedom is sort of the Luciferic principle of freedom for freedom's sake. So the dangerous part about having freedom be a goal is that people can be absolutely captured by the idea of, being free, and obsess about the feeling of just having nothing around you ever. And in that way, it's like there can be no authority figure, there can be no law, there can be no boundaries of any kind, there can be no borders of any kind. Everything has to just be, there can be nothing solid, nothing above you, nothing below you. Everything is just this blob. And that is freedom for freedom's sake, which is a completely Luciferic aspect of freedom, where we're really trying to create liberation from our own lower impulses, our own lower ego, not from everything in existence, right? That's the challenge. Now, the other thing about our Western civilization and the fifth epoch, the fifth cultural age, is that it's during this period that we have to directly confront evil. And we have to confront evil in our period, in our civilization, like never before. This is the age, this is the time where we have to look at evil within ourselves, our own shadow, but also evil within the world. And we can tell that, we can see this in society too, where it's like, I know I have people in my life where it's like you try to talk to them and say, well, evil exists and you have a shadow self. You have parts of you that are unhealed. You got to heal that. And there's also evil people in the world that seek to do evil things. And these evil people in the world can organize and try to do evil things en masse, just like good people in the world can organize and try to do good things en masse. That's the law of nature. And so there's a great resistance to having to look at organized evil or people organizing themselves around evil. And there's just an incredible reluctance to look within in general. People hide from it. The moment that there's, some kind of uncomfortable feeling in their body, it's immediately time to take a pill. The moment that there's an uncomfortable emotion, it's immediately time to take a pill. There's a huge resistance in our culture to actually going inward and starting to do some, soul archaeology and dig in there and see, why is this pain here? What is the dark part of me? What am I capable of? What is unhealed? And then looking at that in the world. Because the people who can see evil in the world, who can point it out and say, yeah, I know what you're up to, those are the people who have done that work within themselves. And we can only see in the world whatever we have become aware of within ourselves. Right? So we have to confront, greed, materialism, lies, manipulation, the misuse of power, subversion, black magic. We have to look at complete inversions in our period, in this age. And it's not easy. But with that, this is also the age that you can grow the most. So because we are confronting so much darkness and shadow during Western civilization, we also have the most potential for growth. We have the most potential to see our light and to create good in the world, because that's what brings about our knowledge of God and our knowledge of true self is our knowledge of evil. Okay? So in the anthroposophical system, Rudolf Steiner talks about a specific period of Western culture that is going to be particularly difficult. And this is the time in which the Saturn angel reigns, or Orpheal reigns. So in occult science, there is not just the procession of great civilizations, of epochs. There's also the rulership of the spiritual hierarchies upon man. So there's also different archangels whose essence and very consciousness is part of man. And they each have a planetary impulse that they bring about. So you have, you could say, clocks within clocks within clocks of influence. So even within, one astrological age, one great civilization, you have the procession of a few different archangels that bring about even yet a deeper quality of that age. So right now we are in the Michael era. And after the Michael era, we're going to switch into the Orpheal era. And so this is from about the year 2200 to the year 2600. And the experience of this Saturn being the Father and the Father's divine love is experienced as wrath. So love in a world that's upside down, in a world that's broken, in a world that's inverted, in a world that's full of sin, divine love is wrath. Okay, it is separating the wheat from the chaff. It is difficult. And that's what the Orpheal period from 2200 to 2600 is going to be. It's going to be very challenging for many different people, especially individuals who do not yet understand what spirituality is. If you're totally tied into materialism and the lower centers, this period is going to be very difficult for any people that are still in that phase. They still have not learned to link the mind and will with God. This phase is going to be one of wrath. So I'll read to you what Rudolf Steiner said about this period. And he said, during Orpheal's terrifying rule, great conflicts will rage among human beings. Orpheal has been called the archangel of anger, who purifies humanity with a strong hand. The story of Christ cracking his whip at the money changers in the temple has deep meaning to it. So that actually relates and parallels to this time of Orpheal, and that is from GA 266. He goes on to say in GA 347, in the next age of Orpheal, divine love will appear in the form of wrath. Okay? Through what happens in humanity, divine wrath will stop the harmful effects of materialism by destroying them. So it's at a certain point, not too far away, literally, like 200 years away, we're going to move into a different era. A different spiritual impulse will emerge. And this will be the impulse of the Father. And this will be like separating the spiritual from the material. And this will be the love of the Father in occultism is usually described as divine wrath, right? So love can actually, obviously love can be creative, but love is also the ultimate truth. So it can be destructive and it can destroy systems put in place that are based in Satanism, based in materialism, right? All right, and this is also one more thing that he says about this time period, the end of the Age of Orpheal, actually, around the midpoint of the Age of Orpheal. And this is Rudolf Steiner, this is from GA 181, and he says, around the year 2500 will be a critical moment in the development of civilization. For then a point will be reached when human nature will have progressed so far that it will be thrown back into decay unless it has acquired the vision of repeated earth lives and karma. So one of the things in the anthroposophical system or in esoteric Christianity is that during our time of civilization here in the West, we have to begin to understand reincarnation and karma. Now, reincarnation and karma have existed as part of humanity's spiritual life for thousands of years. They were removed from the Christian holy books because reincarnation and karma as a concept had sort of distorted, and it was making it so people's focus was not on their material life anymore. It wasn't on the material world. The material world had become, in many different sects, something that, was an illusion, it was Maya, and it didn't really have as much meaning as the spiritual world. And all kinds of deformed and demented ideas about karma and reincarnation had come, distortions of it had come to pass. And so the church fathers said, we're not having this, we're not observing this, because humanity, in order to receive the Christ, needs to focus on embodiment and needs to focus on individuality. It can't be so collective oriented, just, release yourself into the cloud, disassociate from your body. Those are the methods and techniques and ideologies that were of humanity when we were in a more naturally spiritual but intellectually childlike condition. Okay, so we hadn't yet, and when I say intellectually childish, I mean individuation. We hadn't individuated yet. So for this period of individuation, we actually have to come into total embodiment. And in that, we have to see that the material world is just as important as the spiritual world. And very important things are done in our material life that are not Maya. They're not illusion. Okay, obviously the spiritual world, the material world is a distillation of the spiritual world. But the material world is very, very important to work with and to understand. And so that's why reincarnation and karma is not in modern Christian dogmatism. It's not because it's not an objective fact. It is an objective fact. It was taken out for a reason, just like every single culture. As you move on, certain objective spiritual realities are taken in, others are left behind, but there's an objective spiritual world that exists, and we're always trying to reckon ourselves with that and bring forward the right teachings for the time, because you cannot bring in all teachings, of all times in one period, because something specific needs to be developed in every single period. And so when you get religion and you get spirituality, it is specifically for that period of development and what is needed. Now, for the last half, or for this moving forward, we have to bring back into Christianity the reality of reincarnation and karma. Otherwise, the Christian system won't last. So Christianity has to acknowledge its esoteric reality and its esoteric principles. Okay, so Christ has to be included as an esoteric spiritual figure in his entirety, in the cosmos and in humanity and in the earth. Right? And that is something that is very present in anthroposophy. It's very present in esoteric Christianity. But in dogmatic Christianity, there's a great fear of that, because a lot of individuals that are extremely dogmatic don't trust themselves to open up like that, or they don't, or they're in a hierarchical system, and that's not what religion is for. Religion is not about just having a hierarchy. The whole purpose of having a religion is so that you can gain spiritual perception yourself, so that you can perceive the spiritual world and connect with it yourself. Because you have an astral body, an etheric body, you have spiritual bodies, and you have parts of your own being that are in the spiritual world right now, in which your physical body is a materialization of. So every spiritual text, whether it be the Bible, whether it be, Confucian, whether it be, the Vedas, every spiritual text assumes certain things and doesn't reveal certain things that are objectively true and real. It only works within a certain, you could say, perspective. Okay, and this doesn't take away from any religions. It deepens all faiths, and it makes you an actual individual in your faith, because you can directly interact with the Christ. You can directly understand the Christ. You can directly understand the spiritual world as an objective place, an objective thing that all holy books are writing about and trying to understand. That's where we are in our development, and that must come forward as we move towards the sixth cultural age, because the sixth cultural age, the Slavic Russian age, is one of esoteric Christianity and spiritual occult science. That's where we get to, which is why it's called the Age of Aquarius, because we have the objective knowledge of the spiritual world, which makes morality a natural law. Okay? So I'll read that one more time. Around 2500 will be a critical moment in the development of civilization. For then a point will be reached when human nature will have progressed so far that it will be thrown back into decay unless it has acquired the vision of repeated earth lives and karma. So we're going to have to see, in order to pass this initiation, we're going to have to be able to see the big picture of the earth, the large-scale evolution of the earth, which was preserved in Eastern teachings, actually. And then we also have to see the large-scale picture of our own soul. We can't just see ourselves as material beings with, like, maybe we have a soul, but we don't really know anything about it. We don't really know anything about how the soul objectively operates. We know there are angels, but we don't really know exactly how they operate or why, under what laws exactly. We know all these spiritual things exist, but we don't have a scientific knowledge of spirit. And that is what we are required to have to move forward. There's also key events that are going to happen in this Western era. We're going to see the incarnation of Antichrist, and Antichrist spirit is going to become louder and louder and louder as we confront evil. And so we see the rise of the Antichrist system. And eventually the Antichrist culture and the Antichrist, I would say technology will take over the Western Hemisphere. And it will be the impulse developed in the Eastern Bloc, the Slavic Russian area. It is that civilization that will actually rise up and confront the Antichrist impulse and Antichrist. So this is why it's so important to have cooperation there, is because the Antichrist is going to rise within Western culture. And we have to develop the future part of our own selves, because of course you're going to be incarnating in that region potentially as well, that is going to stand up and face Antichrist. So that's really how the battle takes place. It's East and West. Because if you understand the image of Ahriman, which is the Antichrist, which is specifically the spirit of materialism. So the Antichrist is the total embodiment of the spiritual materialism, or Ahriman, the Persian Ahriman is Mammon. And that, of course, appears in the culture that goes deepest into individuation and deepest into materialism, which is where we are now. And it's the Western culture that has this harmonic impulse so deeply in it. And again, from that we get freedom, and from that we get mind, and from that we get individuation, and we confront evil and all this sort of stuff. But nonetheless, the Antichrist is there. And the Antichrist impulse is very present in the West. And so it will eventually rise and begin to devour as much as it can. So when we have this big picture and we understand that it's going to be Eastern Europe that gets the next impulse of life through the earth and the cosmos, this is not something that humanity brings about through some kind of spiritual ritual. It is the earth and the cosmos itself that will bring about the life impulse in Eastern Europe. We're just following it. We're just aligning with it. Okay, so, but it is from there, with the knowledge of spiritual science, as the knowledge of esoteric Christianity, that is what we'll take out and battle with the Antichrist. So again, keeping everything polarized, keeping everyone against everyone else, only serves the most harmonic people in the world that don't want any transference of power or culture or any sharing at all, because they're possessed by that Antichrist spirit that characterizes the shadow side of the West. And what's really interesting, actually, is in Rudolf Steiner's Electronic Doppelganger, which we've talked about, I think, a few different times also in this series. What's fascinating is that Rudolf Steiner also says that Europe actually used to travel to the Americas all the time, and that there were trade routes established before Christopher Columbus, before the 1400s. They would just go up through a northern passage and then down, into North America. And then around at a certain point, the harmonic impulse within the American continent was growing stronger and stronger and stronger. And so what ended up happening is that it was actually the Catholic Church that made these edicts that said no more going over into, North America, because, or the Americas, because the harmonic impulse is building there. There's an energy there, there's a spiritual energy there that is beginning to build. And then at a certain point, 1492, only a couple decades after the fifth civilization begins, by the way, then we start interacting with the harmonic impulse that's particularly strong on the American continent. Okay, so that's where this really reaches a peak. And in my opinion, I think this is going to be the real battleground for a long time as to how much that harmonic impulse gets put into the world is going to be through what is allowed in America. So the harmonic impulse is strongest in Western civilization and Western culture, but it has a specific imprint here in America that's particularly strong. And so it's going to try to, build itself up as much as possible. And so it's very important, like we just had, the big beautiful bill. And I mean, these big bills like this are really anti-American. I'm completely with Thomas Massey on the reality that things should be voted on individually, or at least smaller than that, because it's ridiculous to think that you're going to pass this many things of contradicting natures. It's just wacky. It's not. This is not legislation. This is not politics. This is sneaking a bunch of weird stuff in and making people swallow it because there's some things that are really important. This is not legislation. That's ridiculous. Okay? Because there was this weird moratorium on there that was supposed to go through that is going to make it so you just can't question the development of AI because the other country may get it before you and harm you. Right? It's this constant fear mongering around this when really the world is really locked down and controlled by probably less than 100 people. Okay? That's the reality. That's real. But we're supposed to all hate each other because we're different colors and different regions and different cultures or whatever. Meanwhile, the world is pretty much centralized in its control between maybe 100 people, probably less than that at the top. And then a bunch of middle management that is actually a coalescing of different forces, not just one country or one nation, but a coalescing of different ones. That's what we're looking at. And what they're saying is, listen, we're just going to have to let AI, run wild. Tech has to run wild because you know what? The other guys, they may build that. And then you're digging your own. We're slowly digging our own grave because AI is the last stand. It is an overdevelopment already. Transhumanism is a cancer. It is an overdevelopment. There is no negotiating with cancer. There is no negotiating with an overdevelopment. It's already too much. Okay? So, no, we may not be able to stop it, but we do need to place proper, responsible, stop signs and discussions and pump the brakes so that the coming generations have a chance at life, right? That's where we are with this. So in our fifth civilization, we confront the Armonic impulse, which really centralizes in North America. And the reason why we need to start developing stronger relations with the East is because it is from the Eastern European region that we really see spirituality blossom and a higher civilization blossom that becomes the counterpole to the Armonic world. And that all happens within a few thousand years. And things do tend to move very slowly. So that's why we have to discuss this now. And that's also why you're seeing the deep state just chopping up the world into little pieces and constantly polarizing countries against one another. And, we're being told all these different reasons, but really it's about centralizing power. That's really what it's about. So I also want to mention a book by Terry Boardman. And it's titled Western Hostility to Russia, The Hidden Background to War in Ukraine. And I believe it's 3 or 4 essays. I'm still kind of rereading it and making my way through it. But I do think there's a lot of insight here. And here's an image of the book so you can have a look at it. There it is there. And I'm going to read a passage to you from this book that describes how the East and West are often pitted against one another. And it helps us come to terms with the deeper occult reason why there is this hostility. We even see it like in the spiritual community. There can also be hostility between Eastern thought and Western thought, because there's a natural, it doesn't even have to be like a nefarious deep state, but there's a natural resistance to change. And there's a natural resistance to shifting of power, like just on a gut level. So let's see what Terry Boardman has to say about this. And this is on page 1 of Western Hostility to Russia, The Hidden Background to War in Ukraine. And he says, then again, this larger struggle between the two cultures the Anglosphere or Anglo-America of the West and the Slavs is a reflection of an even more ancient struggle between the peoples of the West and those of the East. The West here means the peoples who are prominent now, in the present time, since the 15th century, when so-called voyages of discovery began from Western Europe. And the West today is led, for better or worse, by English-speaking peoples, notably the USA. The East means the region that provided peoples who were prominent in ancient times, millennia ago, and which will provide peoples who will be prominent again in the distant future. From a spiritual, scientific, or anthroposophical perspective, we are witnessing here a struggle between the present and the future. Okay, let me read that one more time. We are witnessing here a struggle between the present and the future. And I would also say the present and the past as well. The struggle of evolution between a culture that is focused more on the individual and the individual self-assertion, and a culture that inclines more towards the spirit of community. So again, the Western polarities of the world, this is where it's about individuality, independence, okay? The development of mind, freedom, okay? And then the Eastern portion of the world has mastered a sense of community. And that communal nature is there, which is also why when you look at the Eastern Bloc, there was such a struggle with socialism and communism. And it wasn't like a spiritual society. It was, you know, a mechanical cog in a wheel, dangerous kind of communism, you know, where people are just like animals or machines. And so that's the dark side of the East, of having that impulse of community, of the feminine impulse. So it's the masculine impulse, which is embodied in the West, that is individuation, that is intellect, right? But also there's that harmonic Mars quality. That's the evil there too. But then there's a certain evil of the East as well, which is that the Eastern impulse can become evil when people aren't allowed to individuate. They're not allowed to pursue their heart and their soul. It's forced community at the expense of the spirit. The West can have a forced sense of individuality at the expense of the whole, while the Eastern impulse, which is more of a feminine in communal impulse, is at the expense of the individual, is the community. And so those are the shadow sides of both East and West. And in fact, they oscillate back and forth like this to catalyze the human being. Okay. So when we reach the height of this period, it is our noble duty to begin to transfer part of our own selves and our knowledge, and the spirit of community has to switch more towards the East in order for that transition to be meaningful and in order for the evil of Ahriman to be properly confronted. Okay. So here is that book once again. I recommend, if you want a deeper look at this, he talks about the actual individuals and societies that are involved in this from an anthroposophical perspective. And that's going to give you a spiritual understanding of current events. And it's incredible how once you have that, it's like the veil is lifted and you don't fall prey to propaganda anymore. If you understand what's happening on the occult side, what's going on within the actual energies of the earth, the cosmos, what is going on with the evolutionary cycle of man, it's like it becomes clear. Everything becomes clear and it loses its power. It's the lack of spiritual sight that perpetuates all of this darkness in the world. Okay. I also wanted to read a little quote from Manly P. Hall's The Secret Destiny of America. And he talks about how the impulses of nations are mirrored in the sky, and specifically the constellations that are above different continents. And he says, and this is from The Secret Destiny of America on page 10, the ancients believed the earth to be surrounded by the sphere of the constellations, and they assigned to each country the star groups which were above the country's particular area of land. In the arrangement preserved in the writings of Aratus of Soli, the constellation of the eagle spreads its wings across the North American continent. Okay, we know that America is symbolized by the eagle. The serpent winds its coils over Mexico and Central America. And the dragon floats in the sky above Japan and China. Sir Edward Landseer was not far wrong when he declared that the symbols of nations originated in their ruling constellations. Just about everyone knows that the constellation of the Great Bear is in the sky over Russia. And since time immemorial, the bear that walks like a man has been accepted by this as a symbol as the Russian state. Now, the bear is also can be associated with Christ, the man that walks like a bear. It's just a very beautiful imagery there. So, the fifth cultural age of our post-Atlantean period, our current Western civilization, is the time in which man develops his intellect and affirms his individuality. In this period, we are challenged to move away from the qualities that defined the earlier periods of humanity, like intense tribalism and a limited subjective understanding of the spiritual world. Through this period of necessary individuation, we begin to confront evil and thus learn to discern progressive and regressive ideas. However, the impulses of this age can become imbalanced if the individual cannot eventually raise his intellectualism to include the spiritual. The regressive aspect of this period is embodied by Ahriman, or Antichrist, and individuals who do not evolve into a spiritual worldview will sink deeper and deeper into materialism, eventually becoming spiritual materialists that see machines and technology as their God. All right, let me see what you guys are saying out here. Okay, Angel 99, to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. 100%. Isn't that always the way? Doug 209, the narrowing of the Overton window. Yes, this is from a member. Death of debate demonstrates fear of reason, in my opinion. I agree. I think that debate is an important part of this development of mind. Debate is one of the best ways that we develop our own intellect, but public debate allows the collective mind to come about. So when society sees town halls, they see public debates, we're able to go through these digestions, these processes with great minds. And we all grow together because we're seeing these equations played out through debate, through discussion, and that helps to develop the collective public mind. And there should be nothing that is off limits. There should be no topic that cannot be publicly discussed. We should just have standards where we have the truly best possible people representing the different sides of these topics. But there's no question that debate is how the public mind grows and gets better. So when you start seeing all this censorship, like this group of people, this company like doesn't want you to talk about this, like, no, you're doing something wrong and you're doing something bad. People are not babies. People are not children, and you can't infantilize people. It doesn't help anything. What helps is to have good conversation and good debates with qualified people who properly represent all sides of the topic and let people choose. That's real growth. And we should accept nothing less than that. Roberta Harvey, Atlantean is still in the consciousness or ether. I read this recently. Yes. So what's fascinating is this progression of the civilizations, is that we're in the post-Atlantean period, but so much of what happened in the Atlantean era that's unsolved recapitulates within us as well until we solve it, right? So much of the issues that we see are really recapitulations of prior civilizations and even the prior epoch. And that's why Rudolf Steiner was saying, listen, we need to have a much more expanded view of the human being and of the world, because we need to understand recapitulation and that patterns are repeating within ourselves, within past lives, and within the world's past civilizations that stretch beyond our own memory and our own history. One of the worst things that has happened in this time of individuation and fragmentation of the West is that we no longer have a holistic view of the soul, and we no longer have a holistic view of the world soul, meaning that people don't even think that like civilization was even around, over 12,000 years ago. They don't even think that the Atlantean civilization existed. They think Plato was just joking around. They think all of these different authors and mystics that talked about it every single generation over and over again are talking about stories, because they cannot conceptualize with their materialistic mind that is part of this Western thing. They cannot bring it back around in full circle and see that they're actually operating in something much greater than themselves in ways that they can't even imagine. So yes, the prior epoch is very much present. So much of what we're seeing with the development of the hyper development of technology, the idea of bloodlines, the obsession with racism, the obsession with class, prejudice based on family lines, all of that is also the Atlantean impulse unresolved. So people are challenged to release a lot of the qualities that were dominant even in the Atlantean period and evolve out of them towards spirit. But even then, people are still hypnotized and trapped in old Atlantean ideas like the priest king, or, things we talked about in regards to the third temple, these old, outdated, and now inverted concepts that don't have anything to do with our time, that keep rearing their ugly head, because such a large portion of humanity is lost within themselves and has no idea where they are in the scheme of human and global development. Maya. The math ain't mathing here. If each era lasts for approximately 2,200 years and Pisces began over 2,000 years ago, it can't stretch as far as the Slavic era. The Slavic era is the Aquarian age. So when people talk about the age of Aquarius, they're talking about this utopian society that is about the Russian Slavic age. That's like the age of Aquarius. So the Slavic era isn't the age of Pisces, but I can say that when it comes to the precession of the ages, there are people who disagree on calculations. Like people will put in Christ as incarnating in the Piscean age, And they'll, and some people will say we're out of Kali Yuga, we're in Kali Yuga using the Eastern system. So there are different perspectives of that, but I use the anthroposophical system here. I think it makes the most sense. All right. Us PPC, feudalism is alive and well in the West. It's coming back to its own as neo-feudalism. Yes, techno-feudalism. Feudalism enabled a far greater scale by our addiction to technology. That's you're absolutely right, us PPC. We were able to shake off, especially talking about the original intention with the American impulse. We were able to shake off King George, dumped their tea, and the impulse was able to be placed in center. But the more that humanity strives towards his own independence and the discovery of his own spirit, the more forces of evil, to the same degree, try even harder to enslave. And if we look back into very early periods of humanity, the evolution of man is really that of a child to an adult. That's kind of how you can look at it. And so in these earlier times, humanity just really operated as like a tribe. We were basically, like children, and we operated as like a group. And there's a massive amount of people that just want to return to that. They just want to return to the hive mind condition that humanity existed in for so long. And the thought of individuating and thinking for themselves and making a decision that goes against their family, making a decision that goes against their community, making a decision that goes against their friends, that to them is like they can't even imagine it. They can't even imagine going against their tribe. It feels like death to them. And that's because that spiritual impulse, is not built up yet enough inside of them for them to move forward. And it's these individuals in which it's like, listen, if you want a hive mind that bad that you're not willing to individuate, then that's going to be created for you by techno bros that promise you that you just have to upload yourself into the cloud they created. Okay, and you need to just enter into, instead of, I was just talking about this with my group last week, in Christianity, we say you're entering into the body of Christ as an individual through his sacrifice. With the Antichrist, instead you enter into his mechanical body, his 8-sphere body, right? And you lose your individuality. So when the Christ incarnates in the middle of the Greco-Roman period, we receive the sun into ourselves, which is the great macrocosmic entity, which causes and is the foundation of our individuation. And it is through him that becomes a spiritual process. So we enter into his body. That's what the taking in of the body is you're entering into him, to his body, which is actually your purified resurrection body as well. What he did, so too will you one day if you follow him. That is eternal life. But the Antichrist is building a body too. The Antichrist is also building a body for you. And that is a mechanical 8-sphere hive mind, technological hive mind Borg thing that you can enter. You have to choose one or the other. The evolution of time demands that. Okay, you're going to choose one or the other. Ahriman has a body that you can enter into through him too, but you'll completely lose your individuality. You'll fragment it into a million pieces and no longer have that, and you'll enter into a different alternative kind of evolution. But then we can enter into Christ's body, not Antichrist's body, as full individuals, as the capacity he gave us. And through him, we enter into him and we become more and more eternal. That's Christianity. So Antichrist wants you to enter into his weird body too, but that is a machine consciousness. It's a total inversion of Christ. And the beginning of that, the beginning of the Antichrist body, the beginning of the eighth sphere, you could also look at it that way, is techno-feudalism. It is having this massive surveillance state that we don't even need. Like, we don't even need the level of surveillance we have. It's completely ridiculous. You know, and all of these, you know, just all of it. I've probably discussed it enough here, but, you know, I'm preaching to the choir, but we don't need it. We can develop technology and AI or whatever, but it's about the way that it's being done and who is doing it, right? Because whatever we create on the technological side is going to be in the image of who creates it and the spirits that are working in them, right? So, Robert, you said evil is a spiritual entity. Evil is a personal battle and created division within every person. Evil is a global battle because it always seeks an infrastructure. Evil seeks to counterfeit God. Exactly. Perfect comment to follow what we were just saying. Evil, and this is so important too, because evil is a spiritual entity. In occultism, there's very specific entities that exist in the spiritual world that are the emanation of evil for us. Okay, Lucifer is a kind of evil, Ahriman, and then Sorot are the main ones that we deal with. And then there's fallen angels who are in different legions beneath these different characters. So evil is personified in the spiritual world as actual beings with certain qualities. They actually have a life, right? And then there's evil within us that directly relates to these beings working through us. So you can have Ahrimanic beings working through you, which is the dark spirit of materialism. You can have Luciferic beings working through you, which is the dark, is sort of like that Luciferian impulse as well, disassociation, imbalanced delusional spirituality, that kind of thing. So evil isn't just like some symbolic thing that you use to, write in your journal about how you're healing yourself. Like, evil isn't just a mental construct. There's actual entities that are evil, that are darkness to our world. So we have to see that very clearly as well, just like there are objectively good entities. The spiritual world is not just an archetype, a mental construct that doesn't really exist, that we just create to like know ourselves or something. No, these are real entities. These are real beings that work through humanity. When you have extremely high spiritual angel, master, saint working through you, that's called glorification. And you become a saint too. When you have a demonic entity working through you, that's called possession. Okay, so this is how humanity is arranged. Okay, Sarah and Rosa. Absolutely, direct connection is what we're moving towards. Less religious dogma and controlling middlemen, more personal contact with divine forces, especially through the love of nature. Yes, nature is key. And the intense hierarchy and the idea that you need to have somebody translate God for you is actually a lunar concept. It goes back to a pre-Christ period, actually. And it's something that we've held on to because we were so used to it. But really, the full-blown real Christianity is to embody it yourself. and to have that direct connection. That's what it's really intended for, because it's that relationship with him that glorifies your spiritual bodies to make them eternal. No priest can do that for you. Yes, you can learn scripture. Yes, you can learn about history. You can learn about lots of spiritual concepts, okay? So much through hierophants and through teachers. But the actual process of glorification for your body, for your astral body, for your spiritual body, for you, that is done through your direct relationship with Christ, within you, with God within you. No one can do that for you. That's why seeing pastors, it's great to have that. It's great to have priests, and we would be lost without spiritual teachers. But the actual mechanism that makes us eternal has to come through our direct relationship with him, and for that we need to be able to perceive. Roger Melly, transhumanism will take over in 20 years. This is what I was saying is there's just certain people that just can't see the train coming. They're like excited for it because not everybody, sees it from that perspective. Everyone's at a different point in the journey. Blue Sky. Under Project Paperclip, the Nazis were moved to the USA. The current war is a continuation of the Second World War. Yes, so I'm happy to see Project Paperclip being mentioned more and more. It was kind of something that you would, say, and people would be like, what? That's ridiculous or whatever. But it's true. It's true that, the Nazi ideology, which was really the secret societies behind the Nazi Party, has a huge effect on our society today. And in fact, a lot of the ideologies that we would associate with Nazism that took a hold of Germany were happening in the West. They were happening in America. And there's a lot of people in this country that agreed with that. There was a lot of people in South Africa that agreed with that, across Europe that agreed with the different kind of ideas of Nazism, and a lot of that is the old Atlantean ideology of blood and obsession with blood, which has absolutely no meaning today. It doesn't. It's a throwback, which is why it was never able to succeed. Okay, we're going to do 2 more comments, and then we're going to get to the last portion and get into exactly what the 6th great civilization is. Okay, all right. Anders, smartphones are suspiciously 8-spherish, more addictive than gambling through harmonic luciferic algorithms. Yeah, I don't like having a phone. I don't like my phone. My phone is, it's embarrassing, but my phone is, I think, from 2017. I use it. I use my phone the most for the timer when I work out. Like, that's what I use it for. And I just think that, technology is a lot. You guys are right. Okay, last comment. Many people believe evil is just a mental construct, sadly. Yeah, that's what I was looking at too. It's like, listen, I don't mind reading a Carl Jung book here and there. I don't mind reading a psychological book, But when psychologists come forward that deal within the mental plane and they start to speak authoritatively on spiritual topics, like Jordan Peterson, when he comes in and starts associating himself with the spiritual world of Christ, and he speaks authoritatively, and then his conclusions are basically that, he doesn't even know if there is a God, and that a lot of these things are just metaphors and constructs that we should use to make our life better. That is the peak of spiritual materialism, and it's capturing a lot of people. It's like, the greatest trick the devil pulled was to make you think that he doesn't exist. And how that's being done in our time is that apparently, like, very real spiritual entities are mental constructs. They don't really exist. Just do whatever you want. Because it's just a construct. What's a construct anyway? Just a symbol of something within yourself. You know, that's the danger, and how the spiritual world is being, you know, dissolved into the mental sphere when it is beyond the mental sphere and informs the mental sphere. All right, let's get into exactly what the sixth civilization, or the Russian Slavic period, will be. And now this period begins in 3573, and it will go until 5070. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have heard of Edgar Cayce's enigmatic quote about Russia, and Russia being the hope of the world. And at the time when Cayce said that, you know, people were looking at Russia, and Russia had, you know, obviously Stalin and was struggling with communism, and, you know, it's an incredibly huge country with all of these different sort of peoples underneath it. And it was just such a complex, you know, place. And then here's Edgar Cayce saying, you know, Russia's going to be the hope of the world. And we fight on Russia's side in World War II. Russia's part of the Allies. And then almost immediately after World War II, we suddenly turn against them. You know, when they lost so many people on behalf of, you know, preserving Westernness, really. So the relationship is very weird. And so Edgar Cayce, in a trance, is suddenly saying, well, Russia's going to be the hope of the world. What does that mean? Let's see what he said. This is reading 397610, and it was on, people were asking kind of about peace. This is the question. What should be the attitude of so-called capitalist nations towards Russia? Answer. On Russia's religious development will come the greater hope of the world. Then that one or group that is closer in its relationship may fare better in the gradual changes and final settlement of the conditions as to the rule of the world. So what Cayce is saying here is that there's a certain kind of spiritual movement that's happening now, but that's really going to peak in Russia, in that Slavic region. And it's going to be so deep and meaningful, the spiritual movement, that it will become a beacon of the world, right? Now, if you look into Steiner's analysis on this, which we will get into after this, this is because this is where Christianity finally takes its full expression. Christianity is young, it's early at this point, and there's a lot of lunar principles mixed in with dogmatism mixed in with Christianity at this point. So it's not until that Russian period, which isn't, by the way, I want to be clear, like when we're talking about Russia by the year 3976, we're not talking about Russia today. We're not talking about Vladimir Putin, okay? We're talking about something much greater than what's going on now that we need to pay attention to. And how Russia is arranged will be very different at that point. I mean, look how much the world has changed in 500 years, 1,000 years. So this is the Russian region by the year 3976. So it's not going to be the Russia of today, but in order for it to get to that point, we have to work with that region today in order for it to be built up in a way that is appropriate for its rise. Just as in order for America to become what it was, forces had to be transferred into her. And let's get into that with Rudolf Steiner right now in GA 159 about the cooperation between cultures being necessary for the evolution of the world. Within the womb, as it were, of the ancient Indian epoch, that of ancient Persia was prepared. Within the ancient Persian culture, that of the Egypto-Chaldean epoch was prepared, and so on. Our fifth post-Atlantean epoch, our current civilization, must prepare the coming sixth epoch of culture, the Russian civilization. Our task in spiritual science is not only to acquire spiritual treasure for ourselves, for the eternal life of the soul, for the individual, but to prepare what will constitute the content, the specific external work, the content, the specific external work of the sixth epoch of the culture, Thus it has been in each of the post-Atlantean epochs. So there's always been a transference of forces. There's always been the preparation of the future epoch by the current epoch. That is the success of the future epoch depends on the generosity, charity, and cooperation of the current epoch. Okay, very important. The centers of the mysteries were the places in which the form of external life belonging to the next epoch of culture was prepared. So this sort of impulse was prepared in originally these different sort of spiritual groups. The mysteries were associations of human beings among whom other things were cultivated than those cultivated in the outer world. So there's always been different spiritual groups and spiritual individuals who would gather, who would see what was going on and sort of take responsibility and begin this preparatory work. So let's get into a quick breakdown of the qualities of the Slavic age. So the Slavic Russian age is technically the age of Aquarius. So you do get that utopian view, that kind of utopian vibe here. And a lot of what's going on is us trying to create different utopias without having the spiritual alignment and attunement to do so, but we know that it's possible. Well, this is the period where only through the incredible strife that we're going through now, the strife that characterizes our fifth Western culture, can the sixth Eastern culture come to be. So it's like we're doing all that fighting and purging and clearing for this higher Aquarian age to emerge. And during the Slavic period, people become more psychic. They become more spiritual naturally. And there's also a deep spirit of communication, of brotherly and sisterly love. And not because it's being forced by law or dictate, because by that time period, God, through all the strife, becomes obvious. And morality becomes sane. So that's the change that we go through. But before that happens, in our period, and even going up to that marker of the Slavic era, we are going to go through incredible race wars and cultural conflicts and things like that. Because again, there's so much of the population that is trapped in the most materialistic ideas of spirituality and of humanity, which is related to blood and tribe. And it can't let go of ideas of supremacy, right? It's like this is the disease that is in every single cultural group, where it's like, we were talking about this with the building of the temple, that like no one is chosen. That's just not a reality. But every group can have this idea. They can take certain qualities and say, we are superior. And this is tribalism. This is the obsession with blood and placing blood, which is a materialistic element, as being the marker of spirit. It's backwards. And so by this sixth period, the sixth civilization, that will have played itself out. And part of that society will be governed by the innate understanding that, like, it is the spirit within you working upon you that is the most important thing. Other things don't really matter. It's the progress within your heart through Christ that matters. That's the only thing that, yeah, there's other things that go into a human being, but they don't even come close to you actually working upon yourself and evolving through spirit. So that activity becomes the most important. And we also begin to see people becoming closer and closer and more knowledgeable of resurrection. Okay. There's a natural emphasis on people and the people of the society rather than on material things. So right now, so many people just focus on money and material stuff, and it's like they get high on it. They think that's where the energy is. That exhausts itself, and people come to realize that it's actually within us, and it's more subtle and it's more quiet, but that's where it is. And here also we see materialist science, natural science that excludes spirit. That becomes antiquated and it's like laughed at. And we become as spiritual in that society as deep as we go in materialism in this one. So the ideas like Darwinism and this incredible materialistic, atheistic stuff becomes comedy in that period. Now you can see, even after discussing a couple dynamics of it, you can see how if you are a materialist, if you are a technologist, if you've hoarded all of this wealth, and then someone says to you, well, you know, the earth evolves and humanity evolves and we have to begin cooperating with other places in the world. They're like, I'm not sharing what I have. I don't even believe in spirit. I don't even believe in any of this stuff. I believe in machines. I believe in money. You know, I believe in stuff. And that's where this battle, this harmonic battle between light and dark really centralizes, is that, you know, there are just different groups that just get completely trapped in that harmonic impulse. Okay, also the schisms within the church will be healed at that point as well. So right now within the Christian church, there are schisms. There's a couple different schisms, but there's mainly three. Sorry, guys. Those schisms will be healed and they'll turn into one church. And a huge portion of the spiritual culture of Christianity will move into acknowledging the feminine principle, and the Mother and Mary, the Sophia mysteries will be a massive part of the Christian idea in the future. So the Holy Spirit will become known on a deeper level as well. Okay. All right. Oh, and this is a hint as to why Sofia is named in Bulgaria. There's a reason why that region took that name. And so the feminine aspect is not explored at this point in spirituality very deeply or in Christianity, and that will be a massive part of its rebirth as well. And that portion is contained in the Catholic Church, which is interesting, but the schisms will be healed. All right. I will check your comments in 1 second here. So the sixth cultural age, the coming age of the Russian Slavic period, it really needs the impulse of freedom and intellectualism and the understanding of evil to really take root, right? And the fifth cultural age, the one that we're in now, really needs the powerful spiritual capacity of Eastern Europe in order to be healed as well. So that whole portion of, you could say, the Eastern Bloc is special in a way that they operate very close to nature, naturally, and to cosmos. And they also have a natural sense of community, as mentioned. And they tend to be also a little bit more psychic. And so there's this incredible spiritual quality. Like, think of Madame Blavatsky, right? Famous mystic, and all the incredible, even Christian mystics from that Eastern region as well. There's a special kind of I would say, astral perception and spirituality there that has been retained. And when that comes together with the matured impulse of the West, it creates a very powerful movement. It creates a very powerful thing. But speaking about this as well, there's also different kinds of evils in the East too. And there's lots of, every portion of the earth has its good developments, but then also its inversions. And so there's also certain darknesses that the East has to work through too, as it prepares for its rise. It's not just, the West. The East has to work on its self as well. So we really need each other. We really have qualities and capacities that complement each other, and together we will eventually form a very strong force against evil in the world. All right. The sixth civilization, or the Slavic period, marks the beginning of the Aquarian Age. Here, humanity settles into true spiritual life after a long period of confronting the challenges of the Fifth Anglo-German period. During this period, man operates around the objective perception and reality of God, giving all activities a moral undertone. Like right now, it's interesting, in the fifth culture of the West, we have to argue about what morality is. And even when those arguments are made, there's still people who don't believe that morality is a thing. Well, it's different in the sixth period. At that point, morality will be seen as normal. And that permeation of evil will have played out so obviously in the West that it becomes a different interaction with it. It starts to directly work against it. Morality becomes the marker of a successful life. society shifts to prioritize spiritual growth and materialism and scientism become antiquated systems of the past. Well, this sounds great. The sixth cultural age cannot attain this position unless the highest essence of the fifth civilization is worked into its region now. The best images of the Anglo-German culture must be the foundation of the sixth period. The constant strife and polarization in Eastern Europe is due to the powerful materialists, the Armonic materialists that make up the West, the Anglo-German civilization, rejecting this shift in humanity. They do not want to see this shift happen, and attempting to prevent or weaken the rise of the sixth cultural age. So when you see this, breaking up of the East and this battle, it's really about this primal shift in power from West to East. And like the image shows, after the Russian Slavic era, it shifts back west again. So this is a natural process of moving from east to west, west to east, east to west, west to east, as civilizations rise and fall and truly complement one another. But what we're seeing at this point in time is a completely backwards and wild selfishness, the dark part of the individuation impulse in the West, that is preventing this cooperation from happening. Why? Because again, it is from that period, from that region of Eastern Europe, that the Christ forces will rise in the earth and strike down Antichrist. It's when the Michael forces will reach their peak and strike down Antichrist. So do you think people possessed by the Antichrist influence are going to want to see any cooperation with Russia? Any cooperation between Ukraine and Russia? Or do you think they're going to want to keep every single country divided from its neighbors and break them down into pieces and drain all their resources and make us hate each other so that that's okay? That's what we're seeing. And if we can look at this big picture, we can begin to heal these very deep wounds, which may take some time and some selflessness to do, but is absolutely imperative for future generations in ways that we can't even understand right now. All right, that's pretty much that. Let me take a look at your comments here. All right. Robert Scott. Nazi scientists were captured by both sides at the end of World War II. Communism murdered 10 times more people than the Nazis. All forms of modern socialism have been genocidal and evil. That is true. When it came to who was going to get the intellectuals of the Nazi rocket program, the scientists, a portion of them went to Russia, a good portion of them went to Russia. And then a portion of them also went to America. And it's not the fact that they went to Russia is not mentioned very often. We focus on paperclip, but that is true. And of course, communism is a social way of existing where people are legislated to be basically like a machine, a cog in the wheel. And if you want a communal society, that has to come from every single individual in that culture understanding God. As long as there are atheists, as long as there are people who don't understand God, there will be no utopia. There will be no communal nature, because what draws people together is the one thing that rests in all of us, which is God. So you can't legislate a utopia. You can't legislate equality. It's not possible. The highest kind of civilization comes through the objective realization that the spiritual world exists and the observation of its laws in heaven and on earth. And when that becomes an objective reality, as stated in the anthroposophical system, then that is when the culture arises, and not a moment before. But we understand this higher way of operating, and maybe even we remember it from earlier periods, before humanity became so individuated. We remember this more utopian way of existing, this pre-fall, way of operating, and we want to return to it, but we have to enter it now as individuals. You can't go back into, we can't regress and lose individuality. We have to go forward as individuals and go so deeply and deeply and deeply into ourselves, we realize God is there. And within every single person, that has to become the main thing. And then you get a higher age. Okay, Kelly 5001. I wonder if Steiner's dates for these processes should be set in stone like dogma. I believe evolution is fluid, and timelines can compress and expand based on growth and not a set time. I think that how you decide to interact with these concepts is up to you. And it's kind of a balance of order and chaos, or masculine and feminine energies. Whereas sometimes when you break it down, there's an automatic rejection of it because it doesn't feel good to have a boxed fit in, right? But then other times it's like reality doesn't make sense unless there's enough structure to illustrate the cycles of time for you. So it's an objective reality that the earth goes through distinct phases. That's an objective fact. And that we go through life conditions in, for example, sevens, right? 7 is the life number. It's there are objective facts in the spiritual world. The spiritual world isn't what we want it to be. It isn't what we make it. There are objective laws and objective spiritual cycles that we work in. Otherwise, astrology wouldn't be a science of the soul. If everything were just whatever we wanted it to be, then astrology wouldn't exist. And many of the other forms of spiritual work, like even things like tarot, divination systems, they would have no value if there wasn't exact archetypal sequences. Now, where the individual comes in is that not everybody experiences these things the same. So, for example, in the 5th civilization that we're talking about here, for some people, it becomes a period of intense growth, and they make more growth in the 5th civilization as they're facing evil and confronting all of this stuff within themselves. It becomes an incredible, valuable period of hyper development. It's an opportunity to grow more than in other eras. For other people, it's a darker period. So, even though there are set times in which the cosmos unfolds itself, and doors open and doors close, and influences wax and influences wane, your experience of them is really based in you. And that's where that freedom element comes in. It's that no one can tell you what your experience in those times is going to be. And everyone's is based on their own development. So even though there is a structure to cosmos, even though there is the spiritual hierarchies, even though there is the progression of time as development, your experience of these things is based on you, and no one's person's experience is going to be identical, right? So I just want to remind you guys as well that I'm completely viewer supported. I always forget to promote because I just get going. So if you like this work, please consider making a donation. Please consider signing up on my platform at gigiyoung.com. I do live Q&As every 2 weeks. We've got forums. We've got a wonderful community. There's a free course over there as well on the 4 bodies and eternality, and there's just a really amazing content over there, hundreds of hours of it. So if you like this, do consider supporting my work over there. Helps me keep the lights on. All right, and I'll be here again on Sunday. Well, I'll be on my website on Sunday, 1 week from today, doing a live Q&A. So if you have questions about anything you're hearing here, you can join next week and we can go over it. All right. Donna Marie Farrell. It's so hard to get people to look at Project Paperclip and see the connections that we have. Yeah. It's interesting because the Anglo-German period or Western civilization begins in Germany, and then it moves into England, and then it moves even westward into America. So it has this like Western push, and then the American continent is where Ahriman is the strongest, where we see this confrontation. And I just want to say as well that whenever there's a great civilization, the characteristics are across the world. So it's not just like only the West has this. The impulse spreads out in the world and everybody is introduced to the same quality. It's just that it comes through the portion of the earth that is West. And every culture has its time to shine. Every culture has its era, if you will. But even in their era, the quality that they bring about permeates the entire world. So everybody gets the capacity, everybody gets the thing. It's just it comes out of that portion of the world. If that makes sense. Okay, Ashley C. The Commonwealth of Lithuania is a little known power in history that unionized Poland and Lithuania. Putin started with this history when interviewed with Tucker Carlson. Yes, the history of Russia is fascinating, and the history of Eastern Europe is fascinating. And it was fast. It was, he did, he did take the time with Tucker Carlson to explain that the sort of battles in that region are ancient and have been going on for a long time, that it just can't be broken down into like resources or something. Like these are struggles that have been going on for a long time, just like the struggles going on in the Middle East are ancient blood struggles that are not going to be solved with guns or weapons. Okay, they're not. We need to get good at the talents and skills that is supposed to be what the West is, which is debate, intellectualism, negotiation, freedom, diplomacy. This is what the West is supposed to be. It's the impulse that the West is supposed to bring to the world. And yet instead, lately, we're engaging in conflicts. That's the opposite. So we need to get that straight. GC Cardinal, why is Asia not part of it at all? Asia is part of it. India is the first epoch, and that period, that region of Asia is the first period of the post-Atlantean, and so that is included in it. All right, Anonymous M. The Christ force will rise in the same place it was crucified. That's probably in Constantinople or somewhere around there. Okay. That's interesting, yeah. And I noticed a lot of Christians that are being pulled into like the Eastern versions of the faith and pulled into that region, and I find that very interesting as well. Desiree Keynos, thank you for this amazing presentation and needed conversation. Okay, this is a member. I find it fascinating how the Russian people are seen as being cold and stoic in the West, and yet are designed to bring a sense of warmth and love to the world in the future. Yeah, the way it is that the impulse is building in the East. It's not arrived yet. It's not there yet. It's building. And that we are supposed to work in cooperation so that it's done in union and in a meaningful way, and with the impulses that we bring forward in the West. So it doesn't peak and for thousands of years in that region. So what they do have is a deeper connection with the earth, and they have a deeper connection also with how cosmic forces work within the earth. So they have a different sort of spirituality. They have a different impulse behind them, and every part of the world is like this. This shouldn't bring on any ideas of racialism or prejudice, because every part of the world has had its time, has had its influence. Okay? And whether it be in this epoch or the last epoch, whether it be during the Atlantean period when some cultures were extremely prominent, right? Or whether it be in this epoch, every part of the earth has its different impulse. And it should not bring up ideas of racism or ideas of prejudice. We should immediately look at each other and be interested in each other and seek cooperation and collaboration. That's the real human way. Robert Scott. Well said, Gigi. Communal life should be bottom up. Okay, member. I love Gigi. If you see this, I love your Occulted series. It's much needed, I think. Thank you so much, guys. Well, oh, one more. Perhaps, I think I see one more comment coming. Okay. It goes so fast. Mystical Rainbow Casey, perhaps that is why we have so strongly misled to hate that region during the Cold War. Yeah, there's been definitely certain parts of the world that have been targeted to be broken up so that they don't work in cohesion. Part of it on a very material level is economic, and the people who control the world 100% want to exploit the resources on the land, whether it be in the Middle East or whether it be the resources in Ukraine, Russia. There's a very, material desires around this, right? But yeah, the spiritual repercussions are major. And if we look at, again, we look at how we fought shoulder to shoulder with the Russian people in World War II, and then suddenly, as soon as that war ends, we're fighting with them, So we need to wake up to the hidden powers that pull the strings. We need to catch on to their schemes. And I think that we are starting to do that more and more. And I hope that this presentation can illustrate that there should be a cooperative and meaningful relationship between East and West. And our evolution depends on that, and it's time to think that way. And there is a distinct reason why that region is on fire all the time, and that's because that's where the Christ impulse is supposed to emerge. It's in its strongest capacity. for humanity. So, all right, let's get into super chats. Dario Darkangelo, thank you. Helen Red, Serena Rosa, Robert Scott, wow, and Warrior of Light. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter so you know whatever I've got going on, and sign up for my membership if you think that you'd like that. And that's pretty much all I've got for you today. I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Sunday, and have a good one.